afternoon, everybody. My name is Athena. Thank you, Stacy, for introducing me. Um, Today, we are going to talk about prevention and treatment of stress and how it's not just for pigs. So, here are my objectives for today. First of all, why are we talking about this? Why do we need to talk about stress, and why is it such a problem in not only veterinary medicine but in production and farming and all of those things? We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of stress. We're going to talk about, could it be more than just stress? Some how do we fix it, and some tools, and maybe a story or two if I have time. So, qualifications. What makes me qualified to talk about this? Well, I am clinically licensed in the state of Minnesota as a clinical social worker. That is the highest license level in the state. I have been doing this. I specialize almost in veterinary medicine almost as much as I do in mental health. I've been doing this for 8+ years with the University of Minnesota, and during that time, I've really gotten some perspective on the challenges that come with this. The biggest part, the reason I am drawn to talking to pork producers and the pork industry is over 30 years of my life has included pigs. I grew up in southern Minnesota on a farm that our barns are right there in that picture, and that has been home. That is home when my life gets stressful, when the world gets to be too much. That's where I go. That is my grounding source. And if I'm going to draw attention to another picture, those are my two little farm boys. Those two boys are so much happier on the farm, playing around in the dirt and visiting their papa's pig barns. So I had to include a picture of them. All right. So I use this comic so much because I think it just brings some humor to the fact that our lives are innately stressful. Stress has reached a whole new level on top of the world just being innately stressful. Now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there are other complicating factors to that. And so I think we are perfectly timed to not only be talking about stress, but how do we work with it? So specifically, why are we talking about this? In 2018, the CDC did a study on American workers, and farmers in that study were found to have a 1.5 times greater likelihood to death by suicide. That number is astounding. It actually matches up fairly closely to veterinary medicine, which to me was unreal. We knew that veterinarians had a really high suicide rate, but we, for the longest time, haven't been able to say why. To see that farmers have as close, if not identical, statistics that they're facing, a lot of people are going to immediately go to why. Why are farmers, why are producers committing and or choosing to die by suicide? On top of that, we have the epidemic illness that are impacting species at a rate that I can't even keep track of. Just watching not only my dad, but his friends and our community work through every illness crisis that rolls in is unreal. Commodity prices, I'm never going to say that's not a piece of it. Money is tied to so much of this, and it's not just an animal, it's not just a money component. There's so many pieces to it that it plays both sides. Debt load. Oof. To keep up with the times, we got to have new stuff. Equipment breaks, barns age, stuff happens, and with every ounce of that comes the potential for more debt. And if our commodity prices are falling and our debt load is increasing, what are we doing to ourselves? On top of it, there's the rural mindset, and I'm going to call it out because I grew up with it. There is this mindset of you can convince yourself to be happy. I've actually had it said to me before where you can talk yourself out of depression. Depression is something that people who have extra time face. And the fact is, none of that is true. Mental illness and mental health concerns are widespread in the general population. Somewhere between 90 and 95% of the population either faces depression or anxiety or both. So when we think about it, like, it's not something you can talk yourself out of. It's not something that people who have a ton of spare time face. It's something that a lot of people are working through. So that good and the bad of stress. First of all, there's the good. Stress is a requirement for life. Now, that sounds really ridiculous when I say it out loud, but the fact is, humans need a certain level of stress in order to feel productive. And I will show a great illustration of this shortly. Um, but when we feel lower levels of stress, it's almost like we don't have anything motivating us. There's nothing pushing us to do bigger, better, more, and give that great version of ourselves. Yerkes-Dodson. This is basically described by the Yerkes-Dodson law. Humans need that certain level of arousal to hit that peak level of performance. Below that, it's almost like we're just kind of stagnant. Above that, beyond that, is where we see all of the super negative impacts of stress. So I love this illustration. So very simple. So very simple. So low stress, low performance. We're not going to do much. We're basically taking a nap. That mid-level, great, a decent amount of stress, we hit that high performance area. But as you see that with that bell curve, as soon as we get over that, we're to this point where our brain starts to shut down. We're not really achieving much. To use a farm reference, chicken with your head cut off. You're running around, you're doing a lot of things, but you're not actually accomplishing much. So stress once we get over that curve, once we're not in that peak performance space, stress has some really negative effects on our brains, on our bodies, on our thoughts, how we interact, all sorts of things. This slide is really overwhelming, and I apologize for that, but this really just lays out all of the things that your body can experience when you are overly stressed. So this is where the high blood pressure, the fatigue, shortness of breath, body aches, headaches, grinding teeth, all of that, brain fog, that's something that I know a lot of people experience when you're just not able to tap into that great part of your brain to process and problem solve, and everything just feels a little hazy, a little foggy. The ways it shows up in your thoughts and your feelings, easily angered, exhaustion, nervous, irritable, aggressive. I love crying because it's so not a farmer thing, but guess what? I've seen it happen. I know it happens. More than anything, I can tell you that I have seen so many times inability to sleep. Sleep is so greatly impacted when we are overly stressed. When our brain is so focused on getting things done that it keeps us up at night, it's a great time to check in. Where are we at with stress? What does it do to your body and your behaviors? Undereating, overeating. You tend to be one or the other, not usually both. This is where some of that risk-taking behavior and or less healthy options come in. So the increased smoking, drugs, drinking, withdrawing from people. That's where I want you to start paying attention. If your buddies, If the people in your community that you've known for years start withdrawing and you're not hearing much from them, that's where I say check in because that's not a normal thing. So, the normal progression, we start talking about stress, and then comes the topic, but what about burnout? Okay, let's talk about burnout. Burnout, let's, let's give the whole definition. Syndrome conceptualized as the resulting of chronic workplace stress that has not successfully managed. There's three components to this: the feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion, the increased mental distance from one's job, or negative feelings towards one's job, and the reduced productivity. Burnout happens. Burnout happens, the best simplistic way to say it, burnout happens when we've done too much for too long without a break. We can get back from burnout. There is kind of an ebb and flow with this. If we notice that we've gotten burnt out, we can scale back, do some self-care, take care of ourselves, take a break, breathe a little bit. We can come back from burnout, but if we don't do systemic change, we're going to be right back there. We're going to be right back in burnout. So there is some change that needs to happen when we first hit burnout. One of the biggest challenges with managing burnout is that most of the work environments don't actually support slowing down for normal things. Illness and injury. Oh, good Lord. I think I have lost count of the injuries my dear dad has had on the farm. And I just kind of wait for the next one to roll through in the phone conversation. Life outside of work. This one comes up in a funny way. Growing up, I have sisters. I only have sisters. And so growing up, we were told that when eventually we got married, we better figure it out because we can't get married in the spring or the fall because my dad also has crops. So if we wanted him there, we better be able to work it around the farm. Herds never go on vacation. Yeah, getting away from the barns, stepping away from the barns. Finding ways to do that in ways that feel safe for the biosecurity, but also manageable, because having somebody just take over and stepping away doesn't always feel great to the producers. The challenge I have is we know that burnout is a thing. We know burnout is a thing for just about every profession. And if we've said that burnout is a cumulative factor of long-term stress, I question if any of us know what the early signs of long-term stress actually feels like, or if we've shut most of those alarms off because we can't actually listen to them, and we've pushed through, and now the only time we hear an alarm is when we are so far gone. Pushing through is something that I hear in producing and in veterinary medicine all the time. When we push through, we stop asking for help. We take on this mentality of, I've got it. And I use that because it's a phrase that I actually use a lot. When I become too stressed, when my world just feels like it's coming at me from every direction, somebody will ask me for something and I'll just quickly shoot out, yep, I got it. Yep, I got it. Legitimately, should I got it? Probably not. I probably should say no. But as most of us know, saying no actually is really hard. Saying yes is really easy. And there's some societal norms to that too. It's not normal to say no. It's normal to say yes. When we're pushing through, time off becomes less of an option, but it becomes an absolute necessity. That's where we need to take our time off, but we will come up with 1,000 excuses why we can't. But I need to do this and this and this, and Like the list just gets real long. And this is where we tend to engage in activities that likely don't align with our morals and our ethics. We start cutting corners. We feel less bad about things that normally would make us feel a little off. So stress, we talked about, the normal life thing. From stress, we usually go to burnout. And burnout, like I've said, is fairly normal too. A lot of professions experience that. And it's not ideal, but it really is when we do too much for too long. From there, the normal progression, especially in a caretaking role, goes to compassion fatigue. And I take a breath there because compassion fatigue sits really strange for me. I talk about compassion fatigue a lot in veterinary medicine, mainly because that has been the term that for decades, we have felt fit what we were seeing the best. And compassion fatigue is really the emotional residue or strain of exposure to working with those suffering from the consequences of traumatic events. That's a really gross, long definition. But basically, an emotional response to heavy work for a long time. It's different from burnout because of the emotional component to it, but it can coexist. This can also happen from a single traumatic event, or it can be a really big cumulative effect. So, lots of little traumatic things just building up and building up and building up. Like I said, this has been the term used in veterinary medicine for decades. And for a lot of people, they still believe it's the best descriptor for what we're seeing and what's been happening. My biggest challenge, and to some it might sound like semantics, but I really struggle here. The biggest issue I have with compassion fatigue is in this experience. They talk about apathy or the loss of the ability to care. And that, for me, is the big stop sign because I have never met a veterinarian, I have never met a producer, I have never met a farmer who stops caring. They actually, I would hypothesize, continue to care very deeply to their own detriment and more than they would ever want to admit to. So, because of that, if it's not compassion fatigue, what is it? What could it be? Is there something different? Is there something better we could name it as? And there is some moral injury and moral distress. Here's my spiel on these two. These were terms that I stumbled into, and I say that on purpose. I stumbled into them at a social work training probably 5 years ago. And this is a phenomenon that is well studied in veterans specifically. And it was being described, and I stopped the speaker and I said, I want you to go through that again. And I want you to describe that to me more. And in listening and picking up the pieces, I went, holy cow, what if this not only fits veterans, but what if it fits veterinarians? What if it fits farmers and producers? So basically, it's the damage that is done to our moral and ethical compass when we have to engage in activities that don't always line up with our due north, basically. And sometimes that looks like not treating a herd. Sometimes that means inoculating an entire herd. Sometimes that means doing things that don't always feel great, but is in the best interest. I get best interest, but when it doesn't line up with your due north, that tends to have long term impact. So there are innate situations within veterinary medicine and within swine production that line up with this concept. The expectation that we're always going to be on board with all aspects of veterinary medicine. That is a really broad statement, and sometimes not everybody can be on board with everything. Each time our moral compass is ignored, there's a cumulative factor, and our mental health is put in jeopardy when it's experienced repeatedly. What I tell new veterinarians before graduation is before you engage in things, because it's the expectation, I want you to think about how long you would need to be in therapy to be okay with that. Because a lot of things, we're talking years. And if you're willing to sign yourself up for that, then I better be willing to sign myself up for it too, because it can be a lot. The other parts that make me feel like this is a much better fit than compassion fatigue, that emotional connection. As much as my dad and his buddies would like to tell me that they're just pigs and they don't have any connection to them, that is crap, and I know it. I have been there on the mornings where my dad walks into the barn singing to the pigs. Yes, I just admitted to that. He might get mad now that I said it out loud. But there's this emotional connection. You may not name them, but you have a connection to them. You spend significant amounts of time with them. They're in your care, and their flourish or lack of flourish impacts you. When emotional connections are formed, there's a much higher level of devastation when that bond is broken. We talk about this with dogs and cats, and it's hard to translate it over into a herd. But when we think about the financial components and the emotional components, there is a much bigger repercussion when these bonds are broken. So, how do we fix all of it? I mean, I sound a little bit doom and gloom in the first part of this. These are all the things that are wrong, and we need to do something. The first part of this is being able to recognize your own stress. And I think there's some digging that needs to happen with that. So I'm gonna name our common stress types because each of us have one of these that we typically line up with. So the most common ones are your hot reactors, your sustainers, and your resilience. I'm going to be very clear. The goal, the goal for anybody should be to be a resilient. I have been working towards being resilient for years. This is hard work. So your hot reactors, these people, I love to describe my hot reactors because they go from 0 to 60. They blow their lid, they tend to yell. Anger and angry tend to be really good descriptive words for them. They tend to have higher blood pressure, tend to have some heart disease, but they just explode. The minute they explode, they're fine, but they need to explode first. Hot reactors, it's a lot of tension in your body. It's a lot built up. Not the healthiest way to do it, and depending on who you're exploding on, not always the best interaction either. Communication usually is not super great in that explode moment, and so we could do better there. Sustainers. Oh, my name is Athena, and I am a sustainer, and I know that. So here's what sustainers typically look like. Sustainers can go and 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 go even more. Where they stop. So if the stress level is same, similar, or up, they can keep going. But the minute that their brain or their body becomes aware that the stress level might dip low for a minute, or they might get a chance to breathe for a minute, suddenly they are out flat with like respiratory issues or a serious injury or a serious illness. Like they are flat out. This The way this shows up for me is because I need to be able to talk to do my work. When I have gone for too long, for too hard, for too long, um, I actually will lose my voice. It literally prevents me from working. The resilience. Oh, good Lord. This is work to get here, but I eventually want to be there. They are just a cool cucumber. Very little shakes them. They have lower reactivity. They have strong social supports. They have great daily habits. They exercise. They eat healthy. They get their yearly physicals. Like they are the epitome of a great stressed person. Someday, I will aim. I want to get to be a resilient. I just don't know. Changing what you're hardwired to do is actually is so much work that I will just keep saying I'm working towards it, but this is not an easy task. We need to normalize health-seeking behavior. I don't know a veterinarian who is great at asking for help. I also don't know a whole lot of farmers or producers who are really great at asking for help. They are going to figure it out and they are going to struggle until they don't have any other options out. Either they figured it out or they don't have anything else. We're also not really great in the rural populations about asking how people are doing and waiting for a legitimate response. And I say that on purpose. I really dislike the, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. Oh, I'm fine. Good or okay or fine are canned responses that are enough to make most people move past that question and go to more small town chit chat and or legitimate conversation. Most of us don't actually wait for a real response and or push for a real response. When somebody tells me I'm fine, I will stop in my tracks and go, let's try that again. How are you really doing? Because I care. I care how you're really doing. I don't want that canned response. We need to be able to be comfortable pushing a little bit more because if we ask that question, we can get a real answer. We also need to do some digging. Since that CDC study came out, there has been a really big push for well-trained mental health professionals to join the rural world because we see the need. We know it's there. And so if we can train some mental health professionals in how to approach individuals from a more rural setting, maybe we can start to do work to get that suicide rate down. We need to recognize when we've gone too far and when we need to get help for ourselves. I use a river analogy in this, in that right now I view my role as I am downriver and I am yanking out every person that I can get my hands on. I am trying to make a difference in the veterinary world, in the swine production world. I'm trying to keep as many people out of that river for as long as possible. It would be nice to be able to be upriver and prevent people from jumping in. But right now, I don't have enough to be able to do that. So I'm downriver. I can't pull anybody else out if I'm in, and nobody else can pull anybody one out if they're in. So if you're not in the river, I would love to have more people standing next to me, pulling more people out. Let's get this community back to a place where they're emotionally healthy, where they're mentally healthy, where we take time off and it's normal, where we encourage and support our communities and our friends and our colleagues. We need to recognize what we have control over and what we don't have control over. Locus of control, internal versus external. There are a lot of things as humans we perceive that we have control over. The fact is, we don't have nearly the control we think we do. We can control our reactions, we can control our emotions, and we can control our communication. We can't control what anybody else brings to the table. We can't control anybody else's reactions, emotions, or communication. We can't control the market. We can't control disease. There's so many things we don't have control over. Recognizing what we should and shouldn't be carrying with us. Oh, humans. Humans, I love them. Humans tend to pick up things that aren't theirs and they carry it with them for a really long time. So your neighbor says an off comment to you, a lot of us will go, oh, that's clearly a reflection of something I did, I said, or of me. I better keep that with me for the rest of my life. That's not doing anybody any good. Recognizing what is yours and what isn't yours and leaving what isn't and walking away. Breathing. Normally, that's something in person I would do. I do it at the beginning of every lecture I do where I legitimately take a deep, audible breath and then watch the number of people that do it with me. Humans are visual creatures. If we see somebody else take a deep breath, we innately will do it too, typically. When we are stressed, we breathe very short, very quick, very non-therapeutic breaths. They tend to come from right here in your chest. It almost looks like your shoulders are going up and down with your breaths. They're quick, they're short, they're no good. When we're stressed, we forget that we have this whole muscle in our body called the diaphragm that is supposed to help us breathe. When we actually pay attention to where our breath is coming from, we can dial back in to the diaphragm and take a good, deep, therapeutic breath. When working with kids, we tell them to take a belly breath. If your belly isn't moving, you're not breathing right. So if that means you got to stare down at your belly to make sure you're doing it right, do what you got to do. But learn how to take those deep therapeutic breaths, because when we dial back into our body, when we become more present in ourselves, stress starts to come down. We start to have better access to the problem-solving parts of our brain. Breathing is one of the easiest things we can do. It's something we do without thinking about it, but when we think about it, we tend to do it better. Rural stress programs. In building today's lecture, I really dug into what is out there, what can we use to help, where is help. The fact is I was blown away. In the surrounding states, just about everybody has one. Of course, I'm going to pull from the University of Minnesota. Had to put North Dakota State up there because that's where my bachelor's degree is too. But Iowa and Michigan have them too, and they're all really similar. They talk about financial management, mental health and well-being, and the effects of extreme weather on farming. There are some really useful things in here, and they're all accessible online. Super awesome. I believe, I'm positive, they're linked in my PowerPoint at the end. So there's no harm in looking at these. One of them came from Michigan, actually. Their farm stress program had the brain tool. It's a perfect in-the-moment skill or tool to utilize when you're stressed. Notice that if we're going to use the mnemonic device, B, the first one is breathe. We just covered this. Breathing is so important and is the first line of defense to really getting our brain to start focusing back the way we want it to. So we're going to breathe deeply 5 times, releasing that air slowly. Now, if you've ever heard a mental health professional talk, they're usually going to tell you about there's all these numbers in breathing and breathing deeply. Usually you want to breathe in, you want to hold it, and you want to breathe out. In and hold it are usually the same number. Out is slower. So if you're going to go 5, 5, do 5, 5, and 8 is a really good, but in all honesty, the numbers don't matter as long as you are breathing correctly. You're going to tell yourself to relax, either internally or externally, because when we hear that word, when we can really tell ourselves that this is not as high stakes as we want to believe it is, we're going to notice that some of the tension starts to go out of our body and that we can work on releasing the rest of it. We're going to ask yourself what you need or want to feel. I need to feel happy. I need to feel sad. I need to feel, or I want to feel whatever. And focus on that, on the external, on what you have impact on and what you might not be able to change. Again, acknowledging that there are some portions of this that you will have control over and other really big portions that you're not going to have any control over. Then we're going to imagine feeling whatever you identified in your ask. Imagine what it feels like to feel happy. Imagine what it feels like to feel relieved. Oh, that's a good one. And then we're going to check in with yourself again. How do you feel now? Are we a step closer to that, or do we need to go through this again? This is a tool you can do over and over a few times to get yourself to that place where you can go, all right, I have that problem-solving part of my brain back, and we can do this again. So that's what we can do for ourselves. What if somebody else is struggling? How do we approach that? Because again, out and about in the community, the farming communities, it's not normal to walk up and be like, "Hey, are you struggling? Are you thinking about suicide?" Like that's not a normal part of conversation. Trust me, I am aware. There are some really good warning signs that somebody is struggling. Drastic changes in emotion. If this was a happy-go-lucky person and all of a sudden they're super angry, super aggressive, and just not themselves, huge red flag. We need to check in with that person. Changes in attitude and cognitive ability. If they're struggling to put some words together, if they can't problem solve, and if their attitude on the world is, screw it, I'm done, we maybe need to check in with them. Changes in behavior. If this was somebody who was on top of everything and suddenly their lawn looks a mess and they haven't been getting their mail and there's garbage everywhere, like those are some really big changes that I would check in. And then changes on the farm. If they went from their herd doing well to now their whole herd is gone, whoa, what's going on? What happened? How can we help? It's also really important to know when you're out of your league because at any given point, a lot of people are going to be out of their league. This is a really new territory for some people. We don't ask people how they're doing. We don't talk about their mental health. We don't ask about what their financial situation is. But those are all really gigantic stressors that could indicate that somebody is struggling. So knowing when you're out of your league, the Iowa Concerned Health Hotline and the Minnesota Farm and Rural Helpline, both are fairly new, but great resources to be able to help those individuals that we care dramatically about and don't want anything bad to happen to. There's other questions that we can ask though, because as I said, it's not the norm to stroll up to somebody and go, "Hey, are you depressed? Are you thinking about suicide?" That's not a normal part of conversation for a lot of the world. So, using some really key phrases can really open the door for communication to start to flow and for whoever you're communicating with to figure out that you care and you want to help if you can. So, phrases like, I hear you saying, and repeating back what the main concern they had. That tells them, I hear that you're struggling, and I want to make sure that I hear exactly what you're struggling with, and maybe I can help. Normalizing that this sounds like a lot to manage. How are you coping with all that? Oh, I wish my dad was hearing me, but I get some flack in my family for validating everybody's feelings. There is some power in validating feelings. It's not necessarily to tell you that you're right, but it's to tell you that it is okay to feel the way you feel. That is that is what validating is all that is all it's about. Is it's okay to feel how you feel. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but you can feel how you feel. Sounds like the current situation is very difficult. What can I do to support you? These are some tough challenges. I could right now make this. These are some tough times with some really big challenges. How can I help? Sometimes there's nothing you can do to help, but the offer is a huge step. The other one I really like on this page is every situation is different, but insert a person you know, tried, insert whatever it was with a similar situation. What do you think? Sometimes we get the blinders on so that we can't problem solve beyond what we see in that narrow frame. If you can tell me that somebody else in the community had a similar problem and they fixed it with X, here's what I know about humans. Humans don't like to feel like an outlier. We like to feel like we're a part of the crowd. And so if somebody else with a similar situation solves the problem with X, I am more likely to try X because it worked for somebody else. My rock theory. I briefly hinted at this earlier a little bit in that humans tend to pick up things that we think we need to carry, and we carry it with us for a really long time. It can be anything from a side comment to a awful interaction to a lot of things. When when we have something that emotionally stung, whatever it was, if it stung, we tend to pick up that rock. I call it a rock, and we carry it with us. In veterinary medicine, I usually say we throw it in our backpack because I don't know a veterinarian who doesn't love a backpack still. Mind boggling. Anyways, they throw it in their backpack. You can only carry those around for so long before they get to be too heavy, before that backpack is dragging on the floor. The nice thing with my rock theory is we don't have to carry everything with us. If it's not yours, don't carry it. But there is some power in acknowledging that this happened, that it impacted me, that I am potentially changed from what happened, but that I can leave it here and I don't have to carry it with me anymore. I hand out rocks. I hand out rocks. It sounds ridiculous. And if I go back to my early childhood where I was sent out into fields to pick up rocks, it sounds really ridiculous. But I hand out rocks all the time to people as a physical piece to go, you don't have to carry this with me. You have a choice of how long you're going to, and when you're ready, you can go set this down and no longer carry the heaviness. I have a handful of rocks because multiple people keep going there. I have a handful of rocks in Lake Superior. For some odd reason, that is a drawing place to people to leave the rocks of heaviness, but whatever. There's one up in the Boundary Waters. The students that I work with tend to take pictures of wherever they leave it and send it to me so that I have a collection of where my rocks have gone from my office. The other thing that I think is really beneficial is a program called Mental Health First Aid. This is a super popular, super common, nationally recognized training program. And it really is to identify, understand, and respond So if we think about first aid, basically the goal is to stop the bleeding. With mental health first aid, same similar goal of stop the bleeding and get the help for those who really need it. You do not have to be a mental health professional to go through mental health first aid. This is something that employers could do. This is something that community members could do to really support the individuals in their group. Because mental health, again, as I said in the beginning, mental health doesn't pick people just in an urban setting. It doesn't pick people who have a ton of free time. It does not discriminate. It picks everybody, almost everybody, actually. I tend to try to tell at least one story, and this was set up to do it in person and take a poll on, which one do you guys want to hear. But I think if we're going to talk about stress, and I'm all about a good laugh, I'm going to pick pigs on the road. So my dad has given me permission to use any of these stories because they are real. So one of the few times every year my dad steps away from the farm. He goes on a fishing trip with his buddies. And the year this happened, I was left in charge of the barns. Not new to me. I grew up with this. I can do this. That morning, I got up, I went into the barns. Nothing horribly abnormal. Everything was working. Nothing stood out. I went back to the house. I got ready for my day. I was getting ready to leave for work, and our neighbor is pounding on my door. And I answer my front door, and he just blurts out, "Your pigs are all over the highway." And I looked at him and I went, "What?" He's like, "I know it's your pigs. You're the only person with pigs in this community. Your pigs are all over the highway. They're dead and they're all over the highway." And I just went, "Okay, I'll take care of it. Thanks for letting me know." Went back through my brain. The doors to the barns were closed. When I went there, all the doors were closed, yes. We were not missing any pigs. What is going on? I get in my car. I drive to the highway. And he is not joking. There are dead pigs littered all over the highway. Except these aren't little pigs. These are huge boars all over the highway. My first response was to call my dad, who is on a fishing trip in an area with limited cell phone reception. Phone rings, he doesn't answer. I call him again, he doesn't answer. I call him a third time, he finally answers. I tell him what's going on, and he just takes some really quiet deep breaths and goes, "I don't even know what to do with this. I will call you back." Side story to this, I find out later he then spends a great deal of the morning trying to figure out what had happened. And basically what had happened, a rendering truck had driven through the community that morning, and the back door to the rendering truck was not closed securely, and pigs bounced out. But the amount of PR that he had to do, because we are the only pig farm in that area, unreal. So every time this happened, over a decade ago now, every year he goes on this fishing trip, this story comes up because of the amount of stress this caused him, and he was 5 hours from home and couldn't do anything about it. I love this quote. Not really a quote, statement. Mother Teresa required that nuns take an entire year off every 4 to 5 years to allow them to heal from the effects of their caregiving work. If this worked for nuns, imagine what that would do for swine producers, for veterinarians, for anybody who does caregiving work. This work is hard. It is not just physically hard. It is emotionally hard. It is financially hard. There are so many components to it, and so many of you just keep going and going and going and not actually acknowledging that there was some impact to your life from going and going.